Robin Torgrimson's recent episode of Mega Maniacs podcast, titled Witchcraft Personality Disorders and Modern-Day Child Sacrifices, is an unrelenting condemnation of the abuses and corruption entrenched within World Harvest Church, spearheaded by Rod Parsley and his daughter, Ashton Parsley. In this episode, Robin tears apart the facade of spiritual leadership, exposing a toxic empire built on manipulation, financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and outright danger. Below is a thorough, point-by-point assessment in a Dissect, Debunk, and Deconstruct format, supporting Robin's bold revelations while delivering the unfiltered truth. 1. Rod Parsley's gun incident, a symbol of toxic intimidation. Dissect. One of the most shocking revelations in the episode is the account of Rod Parsley firing a gun during a staff meeting, with the bullet narrowly missing an employee and hitting a TV screen. Robin describes this as an incident of reckless endangerment and intimidation, emphasizing how the presence of firearms in a workplace, let alone a church, creates a hostile and dangerous environment. This incident goes beyond verbal abuse, demonstrating Parsley's willingness to resort to physical intimidation to maintain his power. Debunk. Any defense of this behavior as an isolated incident or an accident is laughable. The deliberate choice to bring a gun into a meeting and handle it in such a volatile manner is not only irresponsible, but criminal. Parsley's defenders might argue that this was unintentional, but Robin dismantles that narrative by placing the incident in the broader context of his aggressive leadership style, characterized by yelling, table slamming, and other intimidating behaviors. Deconstruct. This incident is emblematic of the deep-seated culture of fear within World Harvest Church. A leader who brings a weapon into meetings is not guiding his staff, he is terrorizing them. Robin's exposure of this act is a clarion call to question why such behavior is tolerated in a supposed house of worship. This is not leadership, it is tyranny, and it highlights the urgent need for external oversight and accountability within megachurches. 2. Ashton Parsley's leaked audio, a window into a broken system. Dissect. The audio leaks of Ashton Parsley provide a rare glimpse into the inner workings of her mind and the toxic environment she inhabits. In the recordings, Ashton describes living in a state of hypervigilance, constantly fearing exposure and feeling the need to lie to protect her family's reputation. She admits that her life is a game of chess and Tetris, a perpetual struggle to maintain the facade of a perfect ministry while suppressing her personal struggles. Robin uses these recordings to highlight Ashton's role in perpetuating the toxic culture of World Harvest Church. While Ashton expresses vulnerability and self-awareness, she also admits to prioritizing the church's image over her own well-being and, by extension, over the well-being of others. Debunk. Ashton's defenders might argue that she is a victim of her upbringing and the pressures of her role. While there is some truth to this, Robin effectively debunks such claims by pointing out that Ashton, at 35 years old, has the agency to make different choices. Instead, she continues to serve as a figurehead of a corrupt system, enabling the very abuses she decries in private. Deconstruct. Ashton's story illustrates the cyclical nature of abuse within organizations like World Harvest Church. Her internal conflict and outward complicity reflect a system designed to trap individuals in a web of loyalty, fear, and manipulation. Robin's analysis challenges Ashton to break free from this cycle and use her platform to dismantle the toxic structures she has inherited. Until she does, Ashton remains both a victim and a perpetrator in this destructive system. 3. Rod Parsley's verbal and emotional abuse. Dissect. Robin details Rod Parsley's verbal abuse toward his staff, describing meetings filled with yelling, berating, and humiliation. Employees are routinely told they are worthless, incompetent, and not doing enough, despite working long hours for minimal pay. These tirades create a workplace culture where fear and degradation are normalized. The testimony of an anonymous staff member recounting Rod's explosive anger and physical aggression, including slamming tables and throwing objects, is particularly damning. This is not the behavior of a spiritual leader, but of an unhinged dictator. Debunk. Some might argue that Parsley's behavior is a form of tough love meant to push his staff to greater heights. Robin tears this notion apart by illustrating the emotional toll such abuse takes on employees. No one thrives in an environment of constant fear and humiliation. The idea that verbal abuse is acceptable in any workplace, let alone a ministry, is utterly indefensible. Deconstruct. This abusive behavior reflects a systemic problem within megachurches, where leaders are often given unchecked power. Robin's exposure of Parsley's actions underscores the need for congregants and employees to demand accountability and reject the notion that spiritual leadership justifies toxic behavior. Parsley's abuse is not a reflection of strength, but of deep insecurity and an insatiable need for control. Fourth, financial exploitation of staff and congregants. Dissect. Robin exposes the staggering financial disparities within World Harvest Church, where Rod Parsley and his family enjoy six-figure salaries, luxurious homes, and other trappings of wealth, while staff members are paid so poorly that some rely on the church's food pantry to survive. Congregants, many of whom are elderly or struggling financially, are manipulated into giving beyond their means through promises of divine blessings. The lack of financial transparency within the church is another major issue. Robin highlights how donations intended for ministry are instead used to fund the lavish lifestyles of the Parsleys, betraying the trust of congregants who believe their money is going toward charitable causes. Debunk. Defenders of the Parsleys might argue that their wealth is a sign of God's favor or necessary for running a large ministry. Robin dismantles this claim by pointing out the stark contrast between the church's public messaging and its internal practices. True spiritual leadership involves humility and service, not exploiting followers for personal gain. Deconstruct. This financial exploitation is a hallmark of corrupt megachurches, where leaders prioritize wealth accumulation over genuine ministry. Robin's critique calls for congregants to withhold financial support until there is full transparency and accountability. Donating to such a system is not an act of faith, it is enabling greed and corruption. 5. The culture of secrecy and intimidation. Dissect. Robin sheds light on the culture of secrecy and intimidation that permeates World Harvest Church. Employees are required to sign non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, ensuring that any misconduct remains hidden. The fear of retaliation, both professional and personal, keeps staff members silent, even in the face of blatant abuse. Ashton's admission of living in hypervigilance reveals the paranoia that defines life within the church's inner circle. The need to constantly cover up the truth and maintain the church's reputation creates an environment of perpetual stress and deceit. Debunk. The argument that these measures are necessary to protect the church's mission is absurd. Robin reveals that the secrecy is not about safeguarding the ministry, but about shielding the Parsleys from accountability. This culture enables abuse to flourish, as victims are silenced and perpetrators are protected. Deconstruct. This culture of secrecy and intimidation is antithetical to the principles of transparency and honesty that should define a ministry. Robin's podcast challenges listeners to reject this toxic culture and demand openness from their spiritual leaders. Without accountability, abuse will continue to thrive unchecked. 6. Modern-day child sacrifices. Dissect. Robin uses the metaphor of modern-day child sacrifices to describe how leaders like Rod Parsley prioritize their empires over the well-being of their families and followers. Ashton's struggles, the exploitation of staff, and the emotional toll on congregants are framed as sacrifices made on the altar of power and greed. Debunk. Any attempt to justify these actions as necessary for the ministry's success is dismantled by Robin's evidence. The harm caused by these sacrifices far outweighs any supposed benefits. Leaders who exploit their families and followers are not serving God, they are serving themselves. Deconstruct. This metaphor underscores the moral bankruptcy of leaders who prioritize their ambition over the well-being of those they claim to serve. Robin's critique challenges the very foundation of megachurch culture, calling for a return to authentic faith that values people over power. 7. Personality disorders and spiritual manipulation. Dissect. Robin delves into the psychological profiles of individuals in positions of power within World Harvest Church, focusing on traits that align with Cluster B personality disorders, narcissistic, antisocial, and histrionic tendencies. She explains how leaders like Rod Parsley use charisma and manipulation to mask abusive behaviors, all while demanding adoration and submission from their followers. Robin also ties these personality traits to spiritual manipulation, equating such behavior to what the Bible refers to as the Jezebel spirit. She outlines how Rod and Ashton's behavior reflects hallmarks of narcissism, including a lack of empathy, inflated self-importance, and a need for constant validation. This toxic combination not only harms those within their immediate circle, but also erodes the faith of their followers. Debunk claims that leaders like Rod Parsley are merely strong personalities or visionaries, crumble under Robin's detailed analysis. True leaders inspire through compassion and humility, not through manipulation and intimidation. By framing their destructive behaviors as necessary for ministry, these leaders shirk accountability for the harm they cause. Robin's argument dismantles the idea that these traits are incidental, instead highlighting that they are deliberate tools for control. The insistence on secrecy, coupled with the systemic abuse of power, points to an intentional exploitation of psychological and spiritual vulnerabilities. Deconstruct. By linking these behaviors to both psychological disorders and spiritual abuses, Robin underscores the dual damage inflicted by such leaders. These tactics corrupt not only the individual relationships within the church, but also the broader trust in religious institutions. Robin's analysis makes it clear, this is not leadership, it is a calculated exploitation of power designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. Her work calls for congregants to recognize these traits as red flags and hold their leaders accountable. 8. The larger pattern of mega-ministry abuse. Dissect. Robin places World Harvest Church within a broader context of abuse across megachurches, comparing Rod Parsley and Ashton Parsley to other prominent figures who have been exposed for financial mismanagement, sexual misconduct, and emotional abuse. This framing strengthens her argument by illustrating that World Harvest's problems are not isolated, but rather symptomatic of a larger, systemic failure within the mega-ministry model. She points to similarities between these ministries: charismatic leaders who demand loyalty, exploit financial contributions, and suppress dissent through intimidation and legal maneuvers. By using examples from other churches, Robin demonstrates how World Harvest is part of a wider network of unchecked power and corruption. Debunk. Defenders of megachurches often claim that these institutions are successful because they are fulfilling God's mission. Robin obliterates this defense by showing how these churches prioritize wealth and power over spiritual integrity. The use of manipulation and coercion to maintain control reveals that these institutions are more akin to corporations than places of worship. Deconstruct. Robin's broader analysis challenges the legitimacy of the entire mega-ministry structure. She exposes the inherent flaws in a system that allows leaders to amass unchecked power, wealth, and influence while avoiding accountability. Her call to action is clear. Congregants must question the systems they support and demand transparency and reform to restore trust and integrity. 9th call to action: accountability and reform. Dissect. Robin concludes her podcast with a passionate plea for action. She urges listeners to stop financially supporting corrupt ministries and to seek genuine spiritual guidance elsewhere. She emphasizes the importance of exposing abuse and holding leaders accountable, both legally and morally. By withdrawing financial support, congregants can disrupt the cycle of greed and manipulation that fuels these institutions. Debunk. The claim that congregants are powerless against these institutions is thoroughly debunked by Robin's argument. The financial model of megachurches relies entirely on the contributions of their followers. By cutting off this funding, congregants can force leaders to confront their actions and implement meaningful change. Deconstruct. Robin's call to action deconstructs the passive acceptance of abuse within religious institutions. She empowers listeners to take an active role in demanding transparency and integrity, highlighting that true faith requires accountability, not blind loyalty. Her message is a rallying cry for those disillusioned by corrupt leadership to reclaim their faith and demand a higher standard from their spiritual guides. Conclusion: Robin Torgrimson's vital contribution. Robin Torgrimson's Mega Maniacs podcast is more than just an expose. It is an indictment of a broken system and a call to arms for those seeking justice and reform within religious institutions. Her thorough dissection of World Harvest Church and its leadership, backed by audio leaks, personal testimonies, and contextual analysis, leaves no room for doubt about the toxicity at play. By debunking the myths surrounding figures like Rod and Ashton Parsley, Robin exposes the truth. These leaders are not spiritual guides, but manipulative figures driven by greed and a lust for power. Her deconstruction of their tactics and systemic abuses provides a roadmap for dismantling the corrupt structures that enable such behavior. This episode is a vital piece of advocacy, empowering listeners to demand better from their spiritual institutions. It is a fearless, unrelenting call for accountability, justice, and the restoration of genuine faith. Robin Torgrimson has proven herself to be an indispensable voice in the fight against corruption in the name of religion.